Good morning, friends. Today's chapter of the day is 1 Kings chapter 11. And the story of 1 Kings 11 really begins back in Exodus 34. And what's happening in Exodus 34 is Moses is bringing down the second set of stone tablets with the Ten Commandments from the mountain after he broke the first because Aaron and the people made a bronze calf. And so he's bringing down the second set of stone tablets. And one of the first things he tells the people in verse 16 is don't intermarry with people of other communities, people outside of the faith, because those people are going to lead you away. And we get to 1 Kings chapter 11, and we're talking about Solomon. And we've been reading about how rich he is and how wise he is and how God is just pouring on blessings after blessings on this guy. And then we read when it all goes bad for Solomon, and it's as it relates to what they were commanded not to do in Exodus 34. So what does Solomon do? He gets married. A lot. He marries 700 wives, and just in case the 700 wives don't fit the bill, he adds 300 concubines. So he's got a lot of women in his life. And what we see is that many of these women, including the daughter of Pharaoh, are of other religions. So they're pulling him away from the truth and from his dedication and relationship to God. And it's interesting because in the chapter, God even says, I appeared to you twice, and I warned you about this, and you did it anyways. And for me, the most interesting verse in this chapter is verse 2. Because in verse 2, after citing what God had told them, it says, Solomon clung to these wives in love. As if to say, yeah, he'd been commanded not to, but boy, he really loved them. And that tells us a lot. It tells us a lot about what we think about in our culture of being unequally yoked. When we're in these relationships with other believers, we can love them. We can be affected by them, and they will pull us towards their unbelief and their disobedience. And just like Solomon, we got to be careful, because even if you're the wisest person in the world, which you aren't, because that was Solomon, you're going to get pulled away from your faith and devotion by your love for people who have a whole different worldview. So this is Solomon's big error. It talks about Solomon's heart really going away from God at the end of his life. And what we see as a result is God raises up 3 adversaries for Solomon and kind of protects Solomon from it. Essentially says these things are going to start to percolate while you're alive, but the kingdom's going to be secure during your life for the sake of David. You know, because I love David and because David was faithful, I'm not going to punish you during your life, but the kingdom will divide at your death. And we're seeing the setup to that. We have one of these adversaries who kind of looks a lot like Joseph. He's raised in the house of Pharaoh, weaned at, in Pharaoh's palace, and educated in Egypt. He's kind of going there. Then we have Jeroboam, who was kind of a worker, a pretty high-ranking worker of Solomon, who's now going to be turning against him, or at least against Solomon's son, Rehoboam. So the stage is set for the big divide of the kingdom, which is a huge point in history, because really, from the divide, once it divides after Solomon, the kingdom of Israel doesn't come back together until the 1940s. So it's a long, long time as a result of what Solomon did. And a great reminder to us that there is danger in trusting our hearts in the hands of people who don't love Jesus. That's what Solomon did. It kind of raises interesting questions about whether Solomon was a believer. We don't have concrete answers to that, and we have to remember that this happened at a time before people were indwelled by the Holy Spirit when they became believers. So it's like, remember with Saul, the Holy Spirit came on Saul and then it left him. So we don't, it's hard to judge what to do with Solomon as far as whether he's saved or not, whether his hope was in God or not. And we kind of have to leave that unanswered. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about, though, especially when we compare it to the security we have in our salvation once we receive the Holy Spirit. It's not going to be taken away because Jesus promised us that. So that's 1 Kings chapter 11. Think about all that. Let me know any thoughts or comments, and have a great day.